Hi everyone, I'm Hannah Divney, a writer and disability advocate with cerebral palsy. It is my immense pleasure to welcome you to Remarkable Tech's panel discussion today. I'm also the co-founder, editor-in-chief, and creative lead at Missing Perspectives. And to give you an idea of what I look like, for anyone who's wondering, I'm a young white woman in my 20s who navigates the world in a wheelchair. So Remarkable is the venture arm of Cerebral Palsy Alliance, with backing from our principal partner, iCare, as well as Telstra, Vivcourt, and Microsoft. Remarkable is where technology meets human potential, and we see an incredible gap in progress and innovation in technology that breaks down barriers to the inclusion of people with disability. Remarkable runs a 16-week accelerated program that equips early-stage startups with seed funding, mentoring, and support networks to commercialize their startups. Now, I want to take a minute and acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from the land of the Dharawal people of the Eora Nation. This is their land, never ceded, always sacred. And I pay respect to the elders past, present, and emerging of this place. I also acknowledge that we have people joining us from many other places, and I pay my respects to the traditional owners and elders of those places too. Please feel free to share what land you are watching or listening from today in the chat. I would also like to acknowledge the advocates who have played a role in advancing the rights of people with disability, leading society to address the inequalities faced by people with disability. They have paved the way for us. We carry a privilege and a responsibility because of that history. Today, we're celebrating International Day of People with Disabilities, which is a United Nations observed day celebrated internationally on the 3rd of December each year. It aims to increase public awareness, understanding, and acceptance of people with disability and celebrate our achievements and contributions. This year's International Day of People with Disability theme is Leadership and Participation of Persons with Disabilities toward an Inclusive, Accessible, and Sustainable Post-COVID-19 World. You think they could have made that a bit catchier, right? To celebrate and honor this theme, today's conversation will indeed focus on inclusivity in the post-COVID age. For anyone who wants to join the conversation on social media, our handle on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn is @RemarkableTech, #RemarkableInsights. This event has live captioning by Otter Owl, and our wonderful Auslan interpreter is Therese Lewis. We will be recording this event, and it will be made available post the event on Remarkable Tech's YouTube channel, so be sure to subscribe if you want to share it with your friends, family, colleagues, and community. It's now my pleasure to introduce our three panelists for this morning's conversation. First, I extend my warmest welcome to Stephen Ralph, the co-founder and ambassador of Maslow for People from Sydney, Australia. Then I would like to introduce Varun Chandak, the founder and president of Access to Success, who is joining us from Toronto, Canada. And finally, Julie Duong, the director of Empowering Solutions and Policy and Program Development Officer at the City of Sydney. So she's obviously also joining us from Sydney, Australia. Welcome to each of you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'd like to invite each of our panelists to give a quick 1 to 2 sentence description of yourselves for the benefit of our audience, if you don't mind. So, Steve, we might start with you.
No worries. Thanks, Hannah. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, my name's Steve. I'm a young white male as well. Sitting in the living room, I also navigate the world using a wheelchair, similar to yourself, Hannah, after suffering spinal cord injury.
I guess I can go next. Hi, everyone. This is Varun speaking. I'm a young Indian male wearing glasses, and I'm sitting in front of a virtual background, which is blue and orange, and says ATS Labs 2021.
Hi everyone, Julie Duong here. Pleasure to be here this morning. I'm a Chinese woman, a wheelchair user, and I've got long dark black hair, and I am just passionate about disability inclusion and really for everyone.
Okay, with that done, let's get started with our panel. So my first question is to you, Steve, and this is talking about the impact of COVID. For anyone who doesn't know, and I hope this is okay, it's more of a personal curiosity, I guess. You've come into the experience of life as a disabled person relatively recently. So how has the pandemic impacted you, I guess, like learning the ropes
Yeah, sure.
of what it means to live as a disabled person?
Yeah, thanks so much, Hannah. I think, to answer that question, I'd probably like to, just get a bit of context to, my disability further to my intro. So, having spinal cord injury, I suffered that injury about 4 years ago, just coming out to 4 years. So for the first year and a half, I was pretty much hospitalized and, learning to come to terms with the situation and just how to manage the disability. And slowly started to return into community activities, and like you said, just navigating the world and also returning to work. And I was easing into that, I suppose, over the first couple of years that I acquired my disability. And I'd say COVID struck around that time. And, the last couple of years, we've just been in constant, I'm in and out of lockdowns, and there's been a lot of disruption to that. So I think the main impact it's had is, so obviously the massive and like deep impact it's had on people's lives over the last couple of years has been undeniably horrible. However, I think the silver linings for myself with a disability have been that with, for example, my work and my employment, I've been able to actually increase the amount of capacity that I had to contribute. So I think looking into that, it's actually enabled me to build on the foundations that I'd set in terms of adjusting to life with a disability, in terms of returning into the workforce and participating in that respect. So I think that's a really good silver lining to take out of COVID-19. It's a sort of, reference that theme. To move forward with that would be fantastic, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Varun, obviously you bring a unique perspective because you're joining us from another country today. And I wanted to ask you, there was a kind of landmark COVID-19 disability survey in Canada, and that found that of those surveyed, 82% reported that the pandemic was negatively impacting their mental health. Can you speak to this from your experience?
Absolutely.
If it's not too personal to share?
No, not at all. I think it's safe to say that everybody experienced some level of mental health challenges, whether you classify that as a disability or not, that's besides the point, but if it was difficult on everybody. For me, though, I'm hard of hearing, so I rely on hearing aid in my right ear and live captioning, but most importantly, lip reading. So from my perspective, the biggest impact of the disability was the use of masks, because when I cannot lip read, I cannot understand. I may have 40% hearing loss in my ears, but my verbal recognition is about 10 to 20% in both ears, which means that when somebody is wearing a mask and I can't lip read, the impact of that on my life is absolutely immense. I just cannot communicate anymore. So I think a lot of it stemmed from that as well, and that even if you go to a grocery store and you have to talk to somebody, you can't really do that. So tech did help. And I do want to acknowledge that all things considered, I got away with it relatively unscathed. It was tough at times. It was at other times it was just an inconvenience. Maybe I'm downplaying it a little bit here, but I think for me, that was the biggest part of the experience.
And did you find that you were relying on other people to help you communicate? Or, like, I'm not really across how bad the pandemic was in Canada. Were you guys in serious lockdown for an extended period of time?
Yes, so it was pretty strict here as well. Definitely a lot stricter than our neighbors south of the border.
Yes.
From what I hear from friends in Australia, probably not as long and as strict as the one in Australia, but it was still a very extended period of complete lockdown, where we were required to just only leave only for the most necessary items. There was a period when things were sort of rationed in grocery stores and everything. So, to your question about communication, absolutely. I have no idea what I would have done if not for my wife. I ended up relying on her so much for day-to-day communications, for conversations. I did rely on tech as well. So I use an app called Otter.ai, which is a live captioning app. It's free, and that was a game changer for me in situations where I was by myself, but it's not perfect. So if I had the option, my partner, my wife, I have no idea what I would have done without her, to be honest.
Yeah. So, Julie, obviously, I'm curious for you as well. What was your experience of COVID like?
Yeah, I have so many mixed feelings about what's happened and is still happening. So I'll talk about that instead because, post-COVID, and it's good to know what considerations there are for others moving forward. For myself, I'm pretty anxious more than ever, I'd have to say, more than in 2020 when all of this happened. And I think that stems so much from the expectation to return to normal. For example, state government, New South Wales opening everything basically all at once. And while that's necessary, I feel like there hasn't been good consideration for how we retain some of that inclusion, elements of safety, and I would say optimism for doing things differently that we actually had. I think so many organizations are eager to get back into action in how things used to be without really understanding the impact that it's had on individuals during COVID, after COVID. And so that expectation concerns me. An example is working from home. All of a sudden everyone could do it. And when that happened, I was a little bit annoyed because suddenly it was okay. Everyone could do it. They had the capability and resources for everyone who could work on a computer.
So before that, it wasn't a case of they couldn't do it. It was a case of they wouldn't do it.
Yeah, and it was just that it wasn't acceptable as well, I would
definitely.
say. Yeah. And now I think, there's that expectation that we're going back to normal hard and fast. And, sure, they're going to let you work from home 1 to 2 days, but there's still that expectation that 9 to 5 in the office again, traveling 1 to 2 hours commuting, spending money on transport, which is actually quite expensive for some people with disability.
Of course.
Yeah. And I don't think people have really realized the impact as well. And yeah.
That actually leads really well into our next question, which is for Steve again. So you mentioned earlier that you've done something a little different over the course of the pandemic to most people. Instead of decreasing your workload, you've actually increased it, shifting from part-time work to full-time work, thanks to the accommodations that make your life easier, like working from home remotely. I'm just curious if you think the shift from part-time to full-time work has brought a shift about in the way people treat and react or respond to you personally, and then more broadly, like what shifts have you noticed, if any, in the attitudes towards people with disabilities over the course of the pandemic?
Yeah, sure. So exactly as you said, Julie, it's sort of all of a sudden it's normalized remote work, and like you're saying, Hannah, it's brought about a massive change in terms of, at least for me personally, like was able to increase that workload up to a full-time work week, which is, which was really what I was wanting to do. And as I said earlier, I was sort of building up to that, just kind of working through all the logistics and things that had to come with part of living with spinal cord injury. But over time that was becoming more manageable, and it was kind of phasing into looking at full-time work. But the remote work component has definitely helped shape, I suppose, my expectations for myself to be able to do that. And hopefully, as you're saying, Julie, like hopefully those benefits don't disappear over the future. Like hopefully we can take these and show that, look, this has been proven. This is how we can move forward and make it more inclusive, like make the workplace and just the workforce in Australia more accessible, because there hasn't been much change in terms of like disability participation in the workforce over the last 30 years or so. So it's really interesting to see that like all of a sudden it has opened those doors. So I suppose from a perception point of view, I think it shows that, everybody deserves that level playing field to work and to participate. So I think if we can remember all the benefits that COVID has brought about, as well as forget the negatives, that would be fantastic. So
Varun, I just wanted to find out a little bit more about how you feel like people with disabilities, like what the attitude is in Canada, and whether that's changed over the pandemic, whether you've seen any positive impact.
It's very similar to what Julie and Steve said. There's positives and there's negatives. Sometimes those positives are stemming from the fact that now everybody's going through the same thing. To set a little bit of context, I run Access to Success and ATS Labs alongside a full-time professional job, and that job is in financial services sector. So in the time leading up to the pandemic, I had been advocating to get access to any sort of a live captioning service, which would make it easier for me to participate in conference calls. That was a very long, very, very long discussion, because, I'm in investments, I have access to a lot of sensitive information. So there were concerns about where is this transcription going, so on and so forth. And then the pandemic happens, everybody is now working remotely. All the conference calls now happen on Microsoft Teams in my case, and Teams has the built-in live captions. So suddenly nobody has any problem with live captions. So it's very similar to what Julie said, that when it affects everybody, suddenly it's very normalized, And it's a very small example. But looking forward though, the concern again just comes from the communication aspect, because now we're looking at a return to office in January in my case. And now I'm trying to figure out what am I going to do if there's a mask mandate indoors, in which case I'm trying to see if I can get an exception, sort of an accessibility accommodation to continue working from home almost full time for now. So it's going to be an interesting situation about, it's what Steve said, what does that flexibility look like going forward?
Yeah. And then Julie, this all ties back to the founding, or what led you to found the Empowering Solutions and the Diversity and Disability Alliance. Can you just quickly explain to everyone what that is and what the important work that you do is about?
Thanks. Empowering Solutions, that's sort of my own little business where I consult with people on disability related matters. Sort of my specialty is the culturally and linguistically diverse communities as well, having that lived experience and working so closely with the community. And I didn't actually found Diversity and Disability Alliance, but I do have the privilege of being its president now, where we are setting up peer support communities to get people with lived experience from multicultural backgrounds to talk about their lived experience and value and respect that. So people are really valuing what they have to contribute. It's expert knowledge. Why shouldn't it be used? And so going back to Empowering Solutions, and it's funny, it's all sort of related to employment. Firstly, as Steve mentioned, people with disability are disproportionately unemployed, and let's not talk about how unemployment increases if you have a severe or profound disability type. And I would be categorized at that level because, you know, I don't have use of my arms very much, pretty much just the mouth. And I do need support every day of my life. And I figured, that, you know, I was that figure and statistics of unemployment. So I had to do something for myself because, you know, really nobody would give me the chance, you know, the person with a severe disability, when they see me, a chance to work in an environment surrounded by people without disabilities, or really people without visible, profound disabilities.
Yeah, that whole idea of visibility is really quite loaded, I think. I should also mention to our wonderful audience that we do have the ability to have a Q&A at the end of this panel. So if you have any questions for our wonderful panelists, please pop them in the Q&A box. Now, I guess this is all the wonderful full circle discussion. Varun, the work you do with Access to Success is obviously all about the development of people with disabilities into leaders, and that's helped along by assistive tech. So I'm curious, what do you think the role of technology should be, and what barriers do you see it helping people with disabilities overcome as we move into this so-called post-COVID world?
So again, to set context, Access to Success supports the development of future leaders with disabilities and assistive technology. We do that through two programs. One is that supports MBA students who identify as having disabilities through the Access to Success Fellowship. The other is ATS Labs, which is Canada's first accelerator for accessibility, mental health, and aging tech startups. So with that context, I would say there's two aspects in here. One is the role of tech, and the other is the role of everything else. When it comes to tech and innovation, I think it's been proven over time that innovation is sort of a self-feeding positive feedback loop where more innovation, support for more innovation reduces costs, results, and more access to the technology, more visibilities, more options, so on and so forth. Now, as long as in the case of disability, all of this innovation is happening with people with disabilities at the center and in the lead, I think all of that tech will make a real tangible impact in how people with disabilities like myself, for example, in my ability to do my job. As I was talking about that example earlier of live captioning, believe it or not, it now sounds unusual that live captioning wasn't very common just 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And I know that because I was looking for it in 2016 and 2017, and it was just starting out at the time. So if this pandemic had happened 5 years ago, I would have to basically transition to sign language at that point. And while there's obviously nothing wrong with it, it would just be so much more difficult for me to transition to that so quickly. Mm-hmm. So can enable people like me to do our jobs better, better employment opportunities, better productivity, better quality of life in our own personal lives. The other piece, though, is everything else. I don't, and this is coming from somebody who runs a program to support tech. Tech is not the end all be all. There's a lot.
Don't tell us that, Varun. Jeez.
Yeah, I know. I mean, this is remarkable at Disability Tech Accelerator. But like I said, it's coming from me, and I run a similar program, and I can say with confidence that tech is not the end all be all. It cannot be the end all be all unless it's the people who are centered. So ultimately, I think the efforts for inclusion of people with disabilities, for flexible work solutions, for continued inclusion in the workplace after the pandemic, I think those efforts will need to continue for all of this tech and innovation to be even more meaningful.
Yeah, definitely. You're getting a lot of flack in the comments for those your feelings about tech there, but I'm sure Pete and Kate will get over it. Okay. Now, Julie, the next question is for you. For anyone who may not know, you help to support the City of Sydney Inclusion Panel that provides strategic, expert, and impartial advice to the City of Sydney. It helps develop, implement, monitor, and review the city's policies, strategies, and plans to improve the inclusion of people with disability. Can you describe the importance of this type of panel throughout the COVID experience? And then obviously for Sydney, we're opening back up and heading into a post-COVID future.
Yeah. So again, I think it goes back to the concept of lived experience, where those people have gone through it, they're going through it, they know what the community needs and wants, and it's valuable to organisations like the City of Sydney. I think it should be seen as valuable expert information and knowledge anywhere, and you can really use it to improve service delivery, products, engagement, and communication with people, and even have an opportunity to be an ally and advocate. So, for example, the panel obviously provides insight into some of the impacts of COVID on the disability community as an ongoing basis. And as just an example, access to vaccinations, that was an issue that was raised for people to go to places to get vaccinated. Hospitals weren't even accessible. So, the City of Sydney had a duty of care and relationships to be able to advocate and see what's happening in that space and organise, additional different ways of doing things. Having this vital piece of information means that, we were able to put in other measures and that we don't exclude anybody or really impose additional challenges. And right now I see in this post-COVID world that, one, we've got to keep the good things that we've achieved, as discussed. Number two, make sure there's no additional barriers that are being created. And three, having innovation and compassion for things to be acceptable and accessible if we want that inclusive future.
Yeah, definitely. Now, if you can believe it, we are actually coming to the end of our panel. We're going to have a Q&A quick session in a minute, but the final question I have written down here is for Steve. Most of your experience of disability has been throughout the course of the pandemic. You've come into your own in the disabled experience throughout the pandemic. So I'm curious that you would have a very specific idea of what needs to be improved for people with disabilities in a post-COVID world. Can you just quickly speak to that and explain to us?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure. Thanks. I think mainly for me, it's just about awareness, just education of disabilities in general, particularly in the workplace. Like, I think, organizations and things like Remarkable, for example, like it's a breath of fresh air to be in that experience and in that environment with the disability. Like, I think people don't treat you any differently. And I think that's the main thing that I've noticed. And I think with COVID, appearing on screen for most of my work life for the last 2 years, it takes a lot of that out as well. Because unless you disclose that you're in a wheelchair,
right, yeah.
No one would know, right? So that's
been a
really
very unique experience for me too. I've never had that before, ever. It's really odd, actually.
Yeah, it's weird, hey? So I've found that to be, really, really jarring, I think, like compared to how I would have been treated had I been in the office versus meeting a client or meeting a colleague for the first time over Zoom or Teams or whatever it is. Yeah. So I think that'd be great to just change that perception.
I think we're making some progress, but we still have a very long way to go. So now I'm going to kind of do a quick whip around Q&A. We have some pre-submitted questions here, and if our audience has any more, pop them in the Q&A box. My first question I think I'm going to pose to Varun, and it says, what needs to happen to make accessible technologies available to everyone who needs them? And this is from Laura.
Accessible technology available to everyone who needs it.
Yeah.
That's a very, very, very big question.
It is.
Let me go down maybe 2 or 3 points here that immediately pop up to the top of my head. One, as I was saying, people with disabilities need to be centered in this entire process, whether it's the creation of new technology or the scaling of new technology, because we're the people who understand our needs the best. I think I'm preaching to the choir here. So that point is pretty obvious. The second is the need. This is going to sound a little bit self-serving, but I think the second is the need for support ecosystems for the actual development and scaling of accessibility technology.
Mm-hmm.
In Canada, just to share a little bit of context about why I'm talking about the need for that support ecosystem, the kind of work that Remarkable has been doing over the years. In Canada, when we started talking about the idea of ATS labs, the accelerator, people in the accessibility space would tell me that you're not going to find enough startups in this space. Who are you going to serve? So since that point, we actually did the market research and we identified well over 100 startups that are currently active in Canada and are already in the market with products. So that pipeline exists. They just have a lot of unique needs, a lot of lack of visibility, a lack of spotlight that we are trying to address here with what we're doing at ATS Labs. So that support ecosystem through ATS Labs, through Remarkable, through the Inclusive Innovation Network, of which both us and Remarkable are two of the co-founders. These support ecosystems need to exist and grow for the startups to continue growing as well. The last piece is the actual distribution part. When it comes to that distribution, it will have to be addressed in a localized manner. There's no one size fit all because, for example, a very obvious example, the distribution models, the reimbursement models is different by each country. So there's no one size fit all response here. But if you're talking, well, I'm not as familiar with Australia, but in Canada, it would have to be a platform, a model that understands the local nuances here. And then you sort of combine that with the access to low cost assistive technology. The combination of that wide distribution as well as access to low cost technology is the third pillar and what I believe would be key to sort of a much wider availability of assistive technology.
Yeah, definitely. This next question is from Abraham. I feel like it's pretty self-explanatory, but we'll give it to you, Julie. And he says, do you think enough has been done to include and accommodate people with disabilities?
Simply no.
Yeah.
I think that really, no matter how many accommodations you put in there, I think it really needs to start with people changing their attitudes and how they see people with disability or disability as people, not as some special thing that they have to do. Otherwise, I think without changing that attitude and the culture, I think that you're really, the supports that you do put in place are just sort of at best compliance, something nice that you have to do for the disabled person. So, there's a lot more work to be done.
Sure. Okay, we're now going to move into the Q&A box. This question is from Kylie. She says, I work in DIE for a large corporate. One challenge is that people are often reluctant to identify. How do you suggest we build trust so that people are able to identify and get support? I'm going to lob that question over to Steve because I think he has a pretty unique perspective on that just now.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for that one. I feel as though, working in a space like that where you've got the opportunity to change the culture and like the inclusivity of an organization, just to maybe even to contract out to somewhere like Australian Network on Disability to do like a workplace adjustment assessment or a program like that, just to put in place. I suppose it just removes a lot of the barriers for entry into the workforce for people with disabilities, just so everything is as standards. Like it kind of changes superficial practices of an organisation that are easy to implement, but that have a big impact for people with disabilities that will interact and then engage with that organisation in a whole new way. So I think that's one way to look at that, I would say.
Julie, you have something you'd like to say?
Yeah, just really quickly. I did a little bit of research on this in the past with a large organization myself. And there are, you know, key things that really support disclosure. And it's really having a supportive manager, again, with that attitude, the right attitude. It's also about having visible leadership and trusted pathways and actually providing the supports. So when you go through that pathway, a lot of times people go through the process and they get rejected, or things aren't put in place. And then people talk. People will tell stories and say, don't tell them that you're, you know, this, they knocked me back. Don't, you're just going to cause trouble for yourself. Yeah.
This is a very topical question, obviously. Varun, it looks like you have something to say.
I agree with everything what Julie and Steve said. I just wanted to emphasize about the representation aspect. I have personal stories that I can share there, but in the interest of time, I won't go into it. But essentially, having senior leadership step up, having members of senior leadership or even middle management step up and say, hey, I identify as having a disability. You can have webinars, you can have podcasts, whatever platform prefers, and encouraging them to share their stories publicly if they're comfortable, of course. Gives a level of comfort and safety almost to those who are a little bit lower down the ladder, that they're not going to get discriminated against if they self-disclose.
Definitely. I think we all know how powerful visibility is, and leadership in that area is crucial. Now, there are 2 more questions here in our Q&A box, but I'm very conscious that we literally have like less than 10 minutes until we're supposed to wrap this up. So what I might do is, if our panelists want to open the Q&A box, I don't know if any of you want to type out a quick reply to either of these, or we can save them and maybe get your response in an email after the panel, if that works for the people who have asked those questions. The last question for all of our panelists that I wanted to make sure I asked today is kind of a typical question that Remarkable Tech always asks, and that is, can you give us kind of one example of a remarkable insight that you have about this topic of like a post-COVID world?
I'll go first.
Yeah, sure. Let's start with Julie.
Okay, sure. So if you haven't noticed already, I'm really big on lived experience. So get people with lived experience working in your business. And I don't mean in disability specific roles or disability related jobs. I mean in meaningful roles as decision makers, strategists, advisors, technical and operational leads. In the world, you know, across the world, disabilities, their friends, families have control over a $13 trillion annual disposable income. And that's a lot of money. And really, you're doing a disservice if you're not involving us as assets, investors, and human capital, because there's really nothing about us without us.
13 trillion is such a huge number. I cannot wrap my head around that. But the fact that we are worth that much and that we have that much potential to bring to the industry, I wish I could show that to everybody who has any sort of kind of investment portfolio or anything like that. What about you, Steve? What's your remarkable insight?
My remarkable insight would be just, again, to change that perception and attitude in the workforce of people with disabilities, that, you know, exactly like you said, Julie, they're not discriminated against for any reason, and that, yeah, people in key roles in organizations can welcome and can just sort of embrace people with disabilities in any role, just because of the fact that they might be the best person for that role. I think that'd be the most remarkable insight. And hopefully all that remote work and flexible working agreements all stay in place, and everybody can keep participating and engaging in the same way that they've been able to.
Yeah, definitely. Can I just ask you a quick follow-up question, which is, have you, and this might be personal, but have you disclosed your disability to all of your colleagues?
I actually haven't, no. I mean, most would have met me in person, but there are a few that haven't, and a lot of people that have started as well since the pandemic. So a lot of people haven't. Yeah, so I actually haven't. And I mean, I feel like it's, you know, it's not really relevant to the job. It's not really relevant to
Of course.
the conversations we're having at work. So yeah,
Of
I haven't
course.
sort of gone out of my way to self-disclose to colleagues, but yeah, in no way, you know, am I sort of trying to not
Hide it
disclose
or
anything.
anything.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just if it's relevant, it'll be, you know, it'll be talked about. If it's not, then it's not, I suppose.
Yep. Okay, so
Yeah.
Varun, you are lucky last. What is your remarkable insight on a post-COVID world?
A remarkable insight is a very high bar. From my perspective, it's about, I think Steve touched upon that, just about maintaining that flexibility that everybody learned about during the pandemic. I think it's a key tenet of inclusive design, which is a foundational bedrock for everything that we do at Access to Success. So if you don't want to learn anything about inclusive design, that's fine. I would highly recommend people to not forget that flexibility benefits everyone. For working parents, for single mothers, for single parents, any kind of a flexibility that people can build in when they plan out their return to work, return to office, back to personal life, in-person events. That flexibility is just so important. There's just tons and tons of examples where that flexibility will benefit people with disabilities as well as everyone else. So that's the one sort of takeaway, if not insight, that I would encourage everyone to keep in mind.
Thank you for that. The time has absolutely flown, and we are actually at the end of our panel discussion for today. So I just wanted to run through a few quick kind of end notes here and say a huge thank you to our wonderful Auslan interpreter, Therese Lewis, and of course a huge thank you to each of our incredible panelists, Stephen Ralph, Varun Chandak, and Julie Duong. I'm also told that I need to tell you that Remarkable recently launched a fellowship program called the Jessica King Fellowship, which is aimed at providing pathways for people with disabilities to explore the world of entrepreneurship and startups. It involves 6 months of mentoring, a $5,000 donation to your learning, with We Love financial support, and support to explore your goals in this space. Applications are currently open right now, and we are excited to be extending our application deadline to 11:59, Sunday, the 5th of December. That is this Sunday, guys. So if you want to get an application in, I would do that as soon as you can. If you are interested or know someone who might be, please head to the website www.remarkable.org.au and look for the Jessica King Fellowship on the front page. Now, as we always do here at Remarkable Tech, we will be seeking your feedback so we can provide more remarkable insights. So please, after this panel is over, take the time to complete the survey. And as was said at the beginning, this recording will be made available on the Remarkable Tech YouTube channel. Subscribe if you haven't done so already, because you don't want to miss any of these recordings. I've been your moderator, Hannah Diviny. I have CP, I'm a writer and disability advocate, and it has been my pleasure to host this discussion. Happy International Day of People with Disabilities. Okay, bye guys.